Hello, my Bill 5000 Nation. How's everyone doing today? Hopefully everyone's having a great day. If not, I hope it gets better from here. We are back with another Coffeehouse Crime. This one is titled The Babyface Killer, the case of Morgan Huxley. Alright, I'm excited to get into today's video. It was actually suggested to me by a subscriber. You know how I feel about that. I love it. Alright, like I said, I'm excited to get into today's video. Go ahead, turn them lights down low, put on something comfy, cup of something special. Let's get perplexed. I don't know what it means, but I want to use that word today. If you know what it means, tell me. Leave it in the comments or jump on over into the Discord. I'll link that in the description as well. It's a nice place where we can all go and talk about what the hell ever we want. All right. Let's go ahead and get into it. Oh, lordy, lordy, lordy.
When we think of an evil killer, visual thoughts of a tall, mysterious evil man often spring to mind. Sometimes these impressions are accurate, but
honestly, whenever I think of an evil killer, I know it's dumb, but my brain goes to Killer Clowns from Mars. I don't know why. That's the scariest kind of criminal I could ever think of, I guess. I don't know.
When Australian businessman Morgan Huxley walked home from a local bar, this stereotype couldn't be any further from the truth. And following the dark and despairing actions of a young man, he would eventually become known as the baby-faced killer. Welcome back to Coffeehouse Crime. My name is Adrian, and in this video we're looking at the case of Morgan Huxley. If you're new to Coffeehouse Crime, I post solved, unsolved and strange cases here on a weekly basis. So if that sounds like your kind of thing, please consider subscribing to the channel. So grab your favourite coffee, pull up a seat and sit back, my friend.
Grab your favorite coffee, get your favorite B5N coffee mug. Man, we got the Demon Slayer, we got the Angels Over Demons. We have so many, and I'm adding new products all the time. Oh. Definitely go over, check out the merch store. Got some amazing stuff. I'm getting ready to drop some. I put up a few things for summer. I'm getting ready to do a few more summer designs. Don't know really what I'm doing yet. Honestly, if you guys would like to have any input on some of my next designs, hit me up on the Discord. Link's going to be in the description.
The case of Morgan Huxley. G'day. Our case today takes us back to the Emerald City, also known as Sydney, Australia. You already know what I'm going to say. Sydney sports great weather, a great lifestyle, and is very expensive to live in. So, let's switch things up and talk about what's around Sydney instead. Located to its west, you have the Blue Mountains, a rugged mountain range known for its dramatic scenery, steep cliffs, waterfalls,
Beautiful.
and eucalyptic forests. And to the east lies the Pacific Ocean. And, well, that's pretty much it. Not to matter, between its mountains and ocean, Sydney is a beautiful city with a substantial amount of nature and wildlife around it. Zeroing into our case today, we find ourselves in Neutral Bay, a suburb found in the lower north shore of Sydney. Originally known as Wirrabirra by the Aboriginals, Australia's indigenous folk, Neutral Bay was given its new name when it became the shore for all foreign cargo ships. Nowadays, Neutral Bay is an affluent area well known for its young population, and of course, property in the area is at an all-time high. Nevertheless, located on Watson Street in the year 2013, we find Morgan Huxley. Morgan was a bright and charismatic man. He lived in a two-bedroom flat with his friend and housemate Jean Redmond, a 24-year-old physiotherapist from Ireland. As the son of Alan and Dee Huxley, Morgan was the youngest of 3 children, with his sister Tiffany being 10 years older and his brother Oliver 7 years older. Unfortunately, Morgan's mother and father would break up while he was in primary school, but this disruption failed to beat the family's strong bond. Neither did it prevent Morgan from achieving academic success, as eventually he went on to study ocean engineering at TAFE, Australia's technical and further education system. Morgan would eventually become an engineer amongst an otherwise creative family, because although his mother, sister and brother were all artists and graphic designers, he instead opted into ocean engineering. Morgan was well built and considered attractive. Standing over 6 feet tall and weighing 14 stone, he stood above most.
A handsome man. Yeah.
But with a laid-back, warm and charismatic disposition, Those around him always felt safe in his domain. Morgan was known to be the centre of the party. He loved football, loved his family and friends, was very close to his mother, and loved animals, even adopting a lion and an elephant in Cape Town, South Africa. By the year 2013, Morgan Huxley was 31 years old, and with thanks to his degree in ocean engineering, he now owned and ran his own small business which specialised in constructing pontoons, seawalls and jetties. The company, which was named Huxley Marine, had recently succeeded in winning a large contract to build an ocean walkway along Central Coast. And of course, Morgan was very excited about this. His business was finally expanding. This wasn't a typical 9-to-5 job for him. It was his passion project, the thing which pulled him out of bed every morning. There was one more thing to celebrate. Morgan's best friend, Chris Maroney, was due to get married in the coming months. And with that said, an engagement party was on the horizon. As September the 7th rolled around, so did Chris's party. The lads enjoyed their barbecue, and evidently had a bit too much to drink, as by the end of the night, Morgan had managed to lose his shoes. As midnight passed, the group began to divide and disperse.
Man, he's still halfway sober if all he lost was his shoes. You ain't drunk until you've lost your pants, your underwear, your wallet, your keys, and somehow you woke up with someone else's pants, wallet, keys, underwear. That's when you know either you had a really crazy fun time last night or you did not.
Back home, and after hailing a taxi with a couple of his friends, Morgan and the others made their way back to Neutral Bay. Morgan wasn't ready to end the night just yet. He wanted to have one more drink with his friends at his favourite local pub named The Oaks. But unfortunately, the others weren't interested, and instead they decided to call it a night. That didn't stop Morgan, however. He made his way to the local ATM machine before making his way to the pub. At 1 AM on Sunday the 8th of September, a surveillance camera captured Morgan Huxley walking into the Oaks for one final drink. He wasn't bothered about being alone, as rightfully so, he enjoyed his own company. And the bar was only 200 metres from his apartment, which made it easy to get back afterwards. Sitting near the front door, he watched TV while scrolling through his phone and having a beer. And of course, all of this without his shoes. Fast forward half an hour, and the bar was now ready to close for the night. As a result, Morgan was asked to leave, and at around 1:25 AM, surveillance cameras captured him leaving the Oaks onto Military Road. Another few surveillance cameras captured him walking along Military Road and onto Watson Street, where his apartment is located. And finally, shutting the door behind him, he made it home. Morgan's housemate, Jean, was also at home. Jean often had difficulty sleeping, and to add to this, she was a light sleeper too. With the time being 1:30 in the morning, she was already in bed and trying to get some rest. And after hearing Morgan return home, she put on her earphones and tuned into some music. 15 minutes later, she heard knocking at the front door, but believing it's takeout or Morgan's friend, she rolled over and fell back to sleep. As the hour passed by and the clock struck 2:30, Jean was awoken once again for a third time. However, the noise she can now hear coming from Morgan's room sounded very strange. More like the sound of snoring, the noise was muffled, exhausted, and screeching. This didn't sound good. Jean slowly crept out of bed to check up on her housemate. And opening her bedroom door, she turned the hallway light on. What she found below her was horrific and haunting.
What?
In his own bedroom doorway, Morgan was slumped on the floor, covered in his own blood. His breathing was erratic, and he was barely clinging to life.
What?
Panicked and in despair, Jean called for an ambulance. However, this was to no avail, as by 3:30 AM, Morgan Huxley was unfortunately pronounced dead. Morgan's home and the surrounding area were cordoned off immediately, and as residents around his apartment awoke to the commotion, a sense of sadness and fear distilled the local community. Morgan's body had been riddled with knife wounds. In fact, he had been stabbed a total of 28 times on his back, neck, shoulders, and head. And even worse, the tip of the weapon used against him was found lodged in his skull. Needless to say, Jean was traumatized by the event, and in the following hours, his family's lives would be turned upside down. His friends, who he'd seen only hours prior, were now replacing memories of a good night with the images of his body. As those close to him grieved over their loss, officers now had the duty to find out what exactly happened to Morgan. He was a well-loved man with no known enemies, and although he had annoyed business partners in the past, no one wanted him dead. Concerns over local safety also arose. If this attack was at random, will Morgan's killer ever strike again? Fortunately for investigators, the area of Morgan's death had many surveillance cameras. They were also able to track his movements in the hours leading up to his death, and what they found behind him was of great significance. A closer look at the surveillance footage taken after Morgan had left the bar revealed a young skinny man running after him. Perhaps the two were unrelated, but with both men heading in the same direction within the same several seconds, there was a chance this unknown man saw or knew something. It was around 2 weeks after Morgan's death that corresponding investigators started to physically search for the unknown man. Surveillance images suggested that he was wearing a catering uniform, and it was therefore very likely that he was a cook in the local area. It just so happened that as investigators were prowling the streets of Military Road, a barista from the Sydney Cooking School grew curious. The officers may have missed their opportunity if not for this barista, as after seeing the surveillance footage, he told them that the guy in the chef's trousers actually worked there.
Really?
The man's name was Daniel Jack Kelsall. Daniel was 22 years old, working as a chef at the Sydney Cooking School. He was shy, described as socially awkward, and somewhat of a nerd. Entirely innocent looking by most standards. Daniel was introverted, skinny, and only attracted towards other men. He enjoyed gaming, loved the CSI series, and was also a fan of true crime. Born in Wellington, New Zealand, Daniel was adopted at birth by his foster parents Mark and Lynn Kelsall. Although Daniel didn't live with his real mother and father, Mark and Lynn looked after him very well. He had a happy and well-privileged childhood, and with thanks to his foster parents owning a real estate agency, the family were also fairly well off. Daniel eventually went on to study hospitality at Welltech, where he had strong desires to become a chef, an ambition which one day would come true. In the year 2010, 3 years before Morgan's death, Daniel decided to follow his foster parents and move to Sydney.
Okay.
And unfortunately, by this year, he was being treated for depression while also taking Seroquel, an antipsychotic drug. Despite those final alarming details, Daniel had no criminal record. So, when his boss asked him if he was responsible for Morgan's death, he wasn't surprised to hear Daniel deny such a thought. However, Daniel did also add that if he was the killer, they would never catch him as he was too smart and well informed about true crime. It turns out that Daniel had in fact bumped into Morgan on the night he was killed, but this was apparently at the local convenience store prior to him entering the Oaks. However, this didn't explain why he was running behind Morgan after he left the pub, and additional surveillance footage also appeared to show him waiting for Morgan from across the road, which was very strange. As a result, Daniel was immediately brought in for questioning.
I walked into the convenience store. I then had a small conversation. To this guy, Morgan?
Yes, Morgan, yes.
Morgan asked me if I wanted to use the money at the ATM.
He asked you, sorry.
He asked me. I replied no and then left.
Throughout the interview, Daniel seemed to be relaxed and relatively well composed. And while being interrogated about running, he had multiple strange excuses.
It's cold. Mum always tells me if you're cold, go for a jog.
If you're cold, I'm just wondering why you would go that way. That doesn't look like the most direct route.
I don't know. I don't. When I get tired, I don't really pay attention to a lot of things.
He even made the odd joke or funny remark.
How far did you jog for?
Not very far. I might be the only person to tell you where my boss was, but I'm not very good at remembering things.
Sorry, you're not very good at remembering things.
Not fine details, no.
While being questioned, Daniel was made aware of the fact that DNA was found at the crime scene, and when asked if he'd be happy to provide his own DNA samples to compare, Daniel refused, which seemed very suspicious.
I explained to you that we'd recovered some DNA and fingerprints from the crime scene at his house. Yes, gentlemen. And that I asked you, were you prepared to provide a sample of your DNA and your fingerprints?
Yeah.
And that you told us that you weren't comfortable?
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
With no sufficient DNA or evidence attaching Daniel to...
I mean, technically, he don't have to. I mean, if he's not being, like, charged for the crime or anything, right? Like, you don't have to. I'd be getting a lawyer. I don't know. I let other people do the talking for me that know what they're talking about. That's why they get paid the big bucks.
The crime scene, he was eventually allowed to go home. But only 2 days later, the lead detective received a phone call. It was Daniel, and furthermore, he admitted that he wasn't telling the full truth when they last spoke. He wanted to speak to an officer for a second time, and therefore they agreed to meet at a Woolworths car park in Neutral Bay. While here, Daniel confessed that actually he had gone to Morgan's on the night he was killed. The story goes that after making eye contact with Morgan, they briefly spoke on the way home along Military Street. Apparently, Morgan was upset and he told Daniel he had a stressful week, mostly to do with problems at work. Daniel asked him if he wanted to talk about it, and allegedly Morgan agreed. One thing led to another, and apparently the two eventually had sex. When Daniel left, he claimed that he saw an angry woman entering the apartment, and the rest was history. This sounded like a lie to officers. There was no evidence to suggest that Morgan had ever conducted in sexual activity with other men, and as a result, Daniel was arrested immediately. Further questioning commenced, and all in the meanwhile, investigators were keen to collect DNA samples from Daniel and his bag. They had noticed a strange-looking stain on his bag in the previous interview. DNA samples were therefore taken for analysis. However, this would take a few days to come back. And without any further information coming through, Daniel was once again allowed to leave without any charges or penalties. And this is where our story takes a sudden and dark turn.
Oh shit.
It turns out that the analysis on the stained patch on Daniel's bag did in fact turn out to be blood. And more specifically, it belonged to Morgan.
Oh,
Analysis
shit.
also confirmed that the fingerprint found on Morgan's bedroom door was in fact Daniel's. And even worse, Daniel's foreign DNA was found on Morgan's body. In the meanwhile, investigators were also catching up with several psychologists who had previous experience with their client Daniel, and reports with these psychologists revealed a man with intrusive thoughts and an inherent love for knives. It was back in May of 2012, 16 months before Morgan's death, that Daniel confessed his dark fantasies to Dr. Susan Ullman.
Oh shit.
He told her he was having intrusive thoughts about taking a knife from his job at Sydney Cooking School and then stabbing someone on the way home. He even told her that he had once taken the knife from work, but didn't come across any opportunity along the way home. Daniel admitted he had never considered the consequences either. 1 month later, an appointment with a psychiatrist again revealed his fantasy. Daniel gloated he would only go to jail if he wanted to get caught, but when questioned, Daniel said he did not want to kill anyone, and as a result, the discussion was no longer monitored. On October the 8th, 2013, and as a result of corresponding analysis, fingerprints and psychologist reports, Daniel Kelsall was finally arrested and charged over Morgan's murder. While here, Daniel tried to claim that he had Asperger's and autism, and this explained his actions. But ultimately, these were found to be lies, as his behaviour didn't quite fit the expected pattern to his claims. As his trial began, Daniel once again claimed that they had consensual sex, but Morgan was known to be a heterosexual man. No secret dating profiles were ever found, no witnesses ever came forward, and there was no evidence on social media to suggest he had any homosexual desires. Eventually, the court would learn of Daniel's troubling past. He was variously diagnosed with Asperger's, bipolar, autism, and depression. Daniel was also prescribed an antipsychotic drug for bipolar disorder, and was also prescribed the antidepressant fluoxetine. Needless to say, he had some issues to work through. Perhaps not a surprise at all, but Daniel...
So, are they trying to say that where this feller here, you know, he liked the poon, not the pole, that maybe dude did invite him home, was like, yeah, come on by. Like, yeah, I'm going to be leaving the bar here shortly. Like, you see me, holler at me or whatever. I don't know the situation, but are they trying to get at, like, maybe he made an advance towards this feller here and he was like, no. And that's what led to a knife being picked up and someone murdered. You know, like, is that where we're at? You know what I mean? Because if it was the knife from work, then he was already planning to do this to kill him before he was like, no, I don't want to have sexual relations with you, right? Or do you think that the dude unlifed him and then deposited his stuff? Oh, Oh.
Kelsall pleaded not guilty to the murder of Morgan Huxley, and this was despite the overwhelming evidence growing around him. So, what exactly happened on the night of Morgan's death? It is clear to conclude that Daniel was chasing after him on his way home from the pub. But what then? It's likely that Daniel never actually spoke to Morgan. As Morgan returned home, he made his way to his bedroom before opening the window. He then passed out on his bed, likely from all the alcohol. 15 minutes later, after stalking Morgan, Daniel knocked on the front door, and after receiving no answer, he realised the front door was unlocked. Morgan had a bad habit of leaving his front door unlocked, and based on his blood alcohol reading of 0.22, he was pretty drunk and likely forgot to lock it. After realising the door was open, Daniel crept inside, silently made his way up the stairs, and found himself in front of 2 bedroom doors. Jean's door was closed, but Morgan's slightly ajar. Peering in, Daniel saw Morgan asleep, and with the man's guard down, Daniel found the opportunity to act on his desires. As Daniel began to sexually assault Morgan, he likely awoke with anger and confusion. However, before he could gather his bearings and resist, Daniel proceeded to stab him a total of 28 times. As Morgan lay dying on his own bed, Daniel got up, stole his mobile phone, quietly left the house, and disposed of the knife and Morgan's phone before returning to his own home. He then slipped into his pyjamas, got into his own bed, and began to play on his PlayStation Vita. Jean woke up shortly after the event to find Morgan making his final movements from his bed to the doorway. And honestly, I can't even begin to imagine how much this would have ripped Jean out of her comfort zone. Imagine this for just one moment. You are in your everyday home, and then you walk into the next room to find yourself in the middle of the murder scene of your best friend. This case received a lot of attention in Australia while going through the motions, and sadly, Morgan's name was dragged through the dirt by media on many occasions. They even blamed him for his own death. Daniel, on the other hand, seemed to love the attention, and eventually he was dubbed the baby-faced killer of Sydney.
How you gonna blame someone for their own death? He was drunk. He didn't lock his door. That doesn't give someone the right to come in there and stab the fuck out of him.
Daniel's trial lasted a total of 2 weeks, and the jury only took 3 hours to reach a verdict. They all found him guilty over the murder of Morgan Huxley. As a result, Daniel Kelsall was sentenced to 40 years in prison, with a minimum of 30 years before being considered for parole. He will be eligible for parole in 2044. Along with his sentence, the judge said, "Whether Daniel killed for the thrill of it, or whether it was a result of fantasy or obsession, I am unable to say. It was entirely senseless and needless, and why he did it, only Kelsall knows." Psychologists who examined Daniel also believed that if given the chance, he would kill again.
Wow.
A few side notes to this case. But one of Morgan's friends recalls an evening at the Oaks nearly 6 months before Morgan's murder. Morgan told them all a rather disturbing story, where one night a young man who he thought was gay had followed him home down Watson Street. Morgan thought that the young and small man was just being chatty, and perhaps he lived in the same block of apartments. But after opening his front door to say goodbye, the man walked straight past him and inside. Morgan then pushed him outside, however he never reported it to police. And after telling this story to his friends, he then shrugged it off before talking about other things. In the week following Morgan's death, 2 other men in Neutral Bay then came forward to report that they too had been stalked by a young man. The stalker was identified to be Daniel, and he was also wearing the same cook's uniform as before.
Wow.
So, who knows what would have happened if Daniel wasn't caught so soon. Daniel has already appealed to have his sentence reduced by 10 years. But in October of 2017, this appeal was ultimately rejected.
Hell yeah.
And apparently, according to jail sources, he is having so much jail sex with other inmates that he is barely able to volunteer in prison programs. This case was a strange one. Very usually there is some form of reason or motive to the crime. But again, just like the case of Luke Fawcett, it seemed to be senseless. If anything, it was all to fulfill a sick fantasy. And in the process, Daniel has ruined the lives of Morgan's family, his foster family, and of course Morgan and his many, many friends. Morgan was known as a positive, fun influence on everyone. He was a family man, followed his passions, and had a lot to look forward to. And sadly, he lost his life to the senseless actions of Daniel Kelsall. Thank you so much for watching another video today by Coffee.
Thank you so much for having me, Adrian. It's always a good time being on here. Wow. So that little fucker was just going around. He was just begging for something. Like, that's wild, bro. He getting it now, though, but yeah, in there, the sex you want, you ain't getting. The sex you getting, you ain't wanting. I hope you wanted at least one way or another. Like, dude. Whew. Ooh, definitely getting you some fantasies filled today, son. Oh, his poor booty hole. Oh, it's so itchy. My allergies. Sorry, y'all. Itchy. All right, I really enjoyed that story though. Like that was fucked up. But he getting so much prison sex he can't even do anything else. That was good, Adrian. Shit. They don't even gotta feed him no more. He gets that cock meat sandwich every day. Extra mayo. All right, I really enjoyed today's video. If y'all enjoyed today's video as much as I did, please go down there and leave a thumbs up. It really does help the channel grow. While you're down there, if you want, go on over and slap that subscribe button. Become part of the Build for 1,000 Nation. We do some weird shit, bro. And if you want to know when that weird shit happens, ding that bell. It might work for you, it might not. If it does, it'll probably do it late. But if it do at all, jump in on one of my premieres. Go over in the live chat and be like, hey, Bill, I've been hearing a lot about this ding, and it finally happened to me. Made me go out and buy a Bill 5000 merch shirt just so everyone can see how hard my nipples got because of it. Leave a like and dip, and that's all you got to do. As always, be good to one another. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye. Man. Hey, I can't wait till y'all get over into the Discord and start telling me some of the things y'all think over there too, man. The Discord gets crazy, bro. Gotta check it out. 100%.